A major search is underway for the child who police say wandered away from his family home.
He'd been playing in the sand outside his home when his grandmother went to check on him about 5 o'clock late Saturday.
Our hearts are aching and we are holding on to hope that he will be found and returned safely.
Grandparent Josie also happens to be transgender. Josie, who was formerly known as Robert, appeared to begin her gender transition after the death of Vincent Pfeiffer, Shannon's father. The town has been accepting of her choice, according to a Yunta source who I spoke to recently. It is unclear if Josie and Shannon's marriage is still intact after her transition, but they do still live together here at the homestead. The Wednesday, Gus's grandparent Josie, who happens to be a transgender woman, spoke for the first time. Despite the police scaling back their search, she told Daily Mail the family are continuing to look for him. "We're still looking for him. You can't help. We are still dealing with this." The family have urged volunteers to stay away from the property and not help with the search.
On the late afternoon of September 27th, 4-year-old Gus Lamont was playing outside his family's homestead at Oak Park Station. It was the kind of ordinary moment every parent knows. A child by a dirt mound, putting small hands into sand, laughing at nothing and everything. Sometime near 5 p.m., he was seen playing. Roughly 30 minutes later, the family realized he was gone. That brief interval, the half hour between play and alarm, is the hinge for the entire story. In remote country, that half hour behaves differently than it does in towns and cities. Tracks vanish in wind, shadows deepen faster, and distances that look small on a map become treacherous on foot. The rest of this report lays out what is known, what remains unclear, and why those hard, small details matter when a young life is at stake. From the first moment, the disappearance exposed the terrible mismatch between a small child's vulnerability and a landscape that retains few obvious clues. Teams of police, search and rescue volunteers, aerial crews, and specialist trackers swept the property and surrounding country in the days that followed. Helicopters combed ridgelines, drones scanned gullies, tracking dogs were brought in where conditions allowed. People who know the land walked grids until their boots wore thin. But despite an intense, broad response, the search returned little in the way of conclusive physical evidence. Investigators reported no continuous set of child-sized footprints leading away from the homestead, no clothing, no toy, no dropped shoe, nothing that tied a clear narrative to the moment Gus vanished. The absence of usual markers that point to wandering or an animal encounter heightened urgency and fed questions that would not go away. Central to the public concern is the timing of the report. According to family accounts, about 30 minutes passed between when Gus was last seen and when family members realized something was wrong. Then, crucially, the formal alarm to police came after a period of private searching. Investigators and outside observers have fixated on that 3-hour window, the hours of family searching before authorities were called, because timing is everything in a disappearance. In remote settings, the first 2 hours are often decisive for survival and for preserving traces that might otherwise be lost. When a phone call to police is delayed, even by well-meaning private searching, the consequence is that evidence can be disturbed, a potential trail covered, and the earliest golden hours of organized search capacity lost. Investigators repeatedly ask not to cast blame but to build a detailed timeline. Who searched where, what checks were made, which gates and paddocks were covered, and when each person moved through the property. Those factual reconstructions are the painstaking work that precedes any answer. Family circumstances have been another focus of attention and speculation. Reported accounts indicate that the grandmother, who has been publicly identified using 2 names, was the last adult to see Gus playing at the sand mound. Those who have followed the story will also have read about the grandmother's earlier life and gender transition. Some members of the community and commenters have allowed that fact to color their interpretation of her responses. It's worth saying plainly, a person's gender history is irrelevant to whether they are a caring guardian or a suspect. What matters to investigators is what she did in the minutes and hours after she noticed Gus was missing, what she told police, and whether her account lines up with verifiable data. Human reactions to trauma vary wildly. Some people break down, others appear calm or composed, and investigators are trained to separate demeanor from evidence. Still, public reaction has been intense. the family's privacy has been invaded by speculation that distracts from the investigative work that might actually produce answers. The broader family picture also complicates the narrative. The mother was reportedly away tending sheep at the time, and the child's father lives a significant distance from the homestead, roughly 100 kilometers, and has so far declined to comment to media. When key adults are not immediately present or remain publicly silent, neighbors and curious outsiders can interpret absence as secrecy, and silence becomes fertile ground for rumor. Investigators see those gaps as testable variables. Where was each parent? How and when were they informed? And what communications did they have with family and neighbors during that critical timeline? Those are the mundane, traceable facts that matter to detectives. The public, hungry for answers, often reads these gaps as proof of something nefarious. Investigators read them as leads to be methodically checked. Search efforts were broad and sustained. In the days after Gus vanished, volunteers and neighbors joined formal search teams, producing manpower that public agencies alone could not match in that terrain. Aboriginal trackers, volunteers from nearby communities, SES crews, and police walked ordered lines through scrub and sand. Aerial assets searched for heat signatures and unusual ground patterns. The community's response was immediate and heartfelt. Neighbors brought food and water for searchers, and local knowledge helped identify likely places a small, tired child might seek shade. Yet the environment fought those efforts. Gusting winds can erase a shallow print in minutes, evening cools remove thermal contrasts for sensors, and repeated foot traffic by anxious searchers can blur the very markers they hope to preserve. Every time a volunteer crossed a zone, a fragile imprint could be lost. That paradox, intense human movement sometimes erasing the very signs searchers hope to find, is one of the tragic operational dilemmas in remote searches. Within the early search timeline, a small child-sized footprint briefly surfaced as a potential lead. It was photographed and logged, and local volunteers hoped it would break open the case. As days progressed, however, forensic assessment judged the print to be either unrelated to the child or, in some public narratives, possibly staged. The decision by researchers and police to call the footprint inconclusive is important and should be read in two ways. First, scientifically, outdoor impressions degrade fast. A degraded boot tread, a tire scuff, or an animal pad can look like a foot impression under certain lighting and soil conditions. Forensics needs control, scale casts, and comparative samples. Without those, a single print is a weak pillar to build a theory on. Second, in the public imagination, the dismissal of that print became a lightning rod. Some viewed it as proof of a cover-up, others saw it as an honest, uncomfortable truth, that the land simply did not preserve the kind of evidence that would make answers easy. Investigators must therefore be transparent about why that lead did not bear out while continuing to invite any corroborating material from the public. Official posture shifted over time, and that produced fresh controversy. After exhaustive, time-sensitive searches failed to produce new leads, the police reclassified the operation from active rescue mode to recovery and longer-term investigation. That administrative change, which included the end of the official, intensive search phase on October 17, 2025 according to public accounts, has a practical rationale. As days pass without fresh trace evidence, the probability of an immediate live recovery declines and resources are reallocated to forensic, digital, and testimony-based lines of inquiry. But for the community and the family, that shift felt like an end to hope and raised demands for deeper scrutiny and reopen questions. The transition also fueled calls for task forces and reviews. If the initial search did not yield answers, could investigative rigor in the follow-up make up for what the land had erased? One of those follow-up efforts was the creation of a dedicated investigative unit designed to re-examine leads, canvass neighbors, and methodically check digital records and vehicle movements. Task forces specialize in turning a chaotic inflow of community tips into verified, actionable leads. They re-interview witnesses with fresh questions, cross-check phone and vehicle metadata, verify fuel purchases and travel logs, and seek even small details that can tie a timeline together. The work is slow and often invisible. It consists of dozens of minute adjustments to a timeline. A gate found open at a certain minute, a gatehouse visitor remembered, a petrol purchase logged at an odd hour. To the public, that often feels frustratingly slow. To investigators, it is how cases are solved. Community reaction has been mixed, and in places raw. Some neighbors and friends defended the grandmother and the family's actions, noting that rural caregiving differs from urban perceptions. Children play close by, adults trust the land and one another, and brief periods of unsupervised play are common and not usually dangerous. Others interpreted the reported delays, the grandmother's calmness in interviews, and the father's absence as grounds for suspicion. This division has made the social climate around the family tense. That social pressure can impede cooperation and memory recall. Families under attack often withdraw, leading to fewer details offered to investigators. Local leaders have repeatedly appealed for compassion, reminding the public that traumatized families are not courtrooms and that speculation can do active harm. The speculative landscape has been wide. Among the theories publicly floated are that Gus wandered off and succumbed to environmental hazards, that an animal incident occurred, that a third party was involved, and, in darker corners, conspiracy theories that assert deliberate staging or cover-up. Investigators judge each theory against physical and testimonial evidence. Animal attacks, for instance, normally leave torn fabric, drag marks, or blood traces absent from the scene. Wandering and accidental environmental exposure are plausible but would typically leave more debris and marks unless a child found an immediate place of shelter. Human involvement remains a testable hypothesis. It prompts searches for unfamiliar vehicle tracks, checks of passers-by, and verifications of visitor logs. The cautious approach is to hold multiple hypotheses in reserve while rigorously testing each against new information. The ending of the official search clarified one fact that many found chilling: the ground had offered only skeletal evidence. No clothing, no toys, no continuous footprints. That void has become the case's defining feature, and it is also why the investigative lens must be wide and methodical. The absence of physical evidence pushes investigators towards social and digital traces. Who communicated with whom that afternoon? Were there visitors? What did neighbors see? Which vehicles passed by? And what do phone and camera metadata reveal? Those are the breadcrumbs that can reconstruct the minutes after play and before alarm, and they are the things police continue to pursue. In the end, the story is not only about unanswered questions. It is about how a small, ordinary family moment can become a national test of procedure, patience, and public empathy. The disappearance has shown how quickly a community mobilizes in the face of a missing child, how imperfect early action can erase fragile evidence, and how the public's hunger for immediate answers risks substituting conjecture for due process. Investigators insist, and the broader public should heed, that the investigation remains open. Even now, months later, a late tip, a dashcam clip, a time-stamped phone photo, or a neighbor's memory of an unfamiliar vehicle could change everything. The most urgent takeaways are stark and simple. First, that 3-hour reporting delay is central to the unresolved questions and needs careful, forensic reconstruction without rushing to accusation. Second, the skeletal physical record, no clothing, no continuous tracks, undermined straightforward rescue hopes and forced investigators into deeper, slower lines of inquiry. Third, family dynamics, including absence and silence as well as the grandmother's life history, have complicated public perception. Investigators must treat those elements as investigatory inputs, not as verdicts. Fourth, the shift from rescue to recovery reflects the hard arithmetic of search operations but must be matched by sustained investigative effort. Finally, public restraint and targeted cooperation, reporting even small, verifiable details to police rather than amplifying rumor, remain the most practical ways the community can help. If you have any verifiable information, a time-stamped photograph, dashcam footage, records of vehicle movement, or any memory of unusual activity near Oak Park Station on that afternoon, bring it to the detectives handling the case. Small, late-arriving details have solved many cold puzzles. Keep asking constructive questions, keep the family in your compassion rather than your condemnation, and remember that a patient, evidence-driven investigation is the best path to answers.